Well, happy Halloween all! The nights are getting colder and darker, and I decided this week to take a look at a film that I discovered last Halloween for the first time. Frankly, I'm surprised it's not more well known, really. While it may be a bit more popular in the States, I can honestly say that if I asked people from the UK if they knew about the 2007 horror semi-anthology movie Trick or Treat, I'd probably be faced with a decent wave of blank faces. Now, this isn't to be confused with the 1986 Gene Simmons, Ozzy Osbourne, Demon Rocktacular Trick or Treat. That film's staying well and truly buried. For now. No, this is actually a contemporary movie. Admittedly, it's not the newest film I've spoken about on here, but it's from the late 2000s, so it's still pretty modern. By my standards. The film acts as a sort of anthology series. I say it's sort of an anthology because the stories aren't all entirely self-contained. They all vaguely overlap to tell one big horror story that affects the residents of a small suburban town one Halloween night. This also means that the film isn't entirely linear, and that's one of the things I absolutely love with this, is that you can never really tell fully what exactly is going to happen when and where in relation to real time. 1 minute you'll see someone get attacked, only for them to pop up again 30 minutes later absolutely fine, only for you to then realise that the scene you watched originally took place after the scene you're watching now. It's a bit confusing. But it helps give the film a level of uncertainty, and the muddled narrative always means you're on your toes wondering exactly what's going to happen next. There are 4 tales in this movie. The first follows a group of young women as they head out for a night on the town looking to hook up, get loaded and have a good time. They've dragged out one of the girl's younger sisters who's a virgin and doesn't have the confidence to just go up to a guy and strike something up. So they offer to act as her guides to get her through the night. Though as the film progresses it becomes clear that not all is as meets the eye with these young ladies. The second story follows a school principal who has a very shady hobby. And on this night in particular, things get a bit out of hand as he attempts to hide his interests from his son and the neighbours. The third follows a young group of kids who are doing the equivalent of a Bloody Mary challenge based on local folk tales about a grisly event that happened in the town's past. They invite a shy and nerdy girl along for the ride, and as the night progresses, the kids realise they may have bitten off more than they can chew. And the fourth narrative follows an old miser who lives alone with his dog who hates Halloween and chases any kids who come trick-or-treating off his property. That is until a strange otherworldly being called Sam appears at the miser's house and teaches him the true meaning of Halloween. Sam is the linchpin in all of this. The film makes it somewhat apparent that he's some kind of embodiment of Halloween. He's pint-sized, and within the first few minutes of the film it's established that he's absolutely dangerous and totally hell-bent on ensuring that for one night of the year, Halloween is celebrated in this town to its absolute fullest. And right from the very first shot of this movie, it wants you to know that it's a Halloween film. It practically vomits orange at the audience for its entire runtime. Everything is dark, eerie, and has a strange candlelit vibe about it that totally submerges you in the Halloween spirit. I'm not lying when I say that this is easily the most Halloweeny looking Halloween film that I've seen in the last 20 years. Maybe even the last 25 years. So bold in its commitment to fully envelop you in the season, it's literally falling over itself to cover every aspect of Halloween. From the slasher genre to the more mythic elements of Samhain to the drunken frat boy parties, everyone celebrates Halloween differently, and this film covers almost every angle that one could approach Halloween from. Even people who don't like Halloween will find something in this film. It's nuts, quite frankly, that this is really just a surface observation. I haven't even gotten to the good stuff yet. This film was written and directed by Michael Dougherty. The guy's had a pretty unique writing career, I think it's fair to say. Up until this film got made, he had credits for writing the screenplays for movies like Superman Returns and X-Men 2. Trick or Treat was his first real attempt at writing and directing a feature. And while his later offerings on the writing front would include the likes of X-Men Apocalypse, and on the directing front films like Krampus, I can tell you now to take the information I've just told you and just throw it away. Forget about it. Because Trick or Treat is pretty much like none of those films I've just mentioned. And it's genuinely entertaining. It's really good fun. As I mentioned a short time ago, the film is very dedicated to its visual style, and matching that, the direction here is absolutely superb. I'll get this out of the way from the start. The only thing about the direction that I wasn't too keen on was the very flimsy setup that this movie's supposed to be either set in or based on a comic book series called Trick or Treat. Honestly, that could have been lost for me and it really wouldn't have made much of a difference. It just seemed a bit pointless because the film shares absolutely nothing aesthetically with comic books apart from a couple of text screens that fade in and out in the final minutes of the final act of the film. Well, that and the fact that the intro and outro sequence for this show that Trick or Treat is a comic book series in this universe. Other than that, comics just aren't mentioned and no element of comic book storytelling is at all prominent here. But that's by the by really, because had they tried to implement it more, I'd probably be complaining about it. But because they so half-heartedly used this as a storytelling technique, I actually forgot until the end credits that they were even running with a comic book motif. The rest of this film, though, is like a bloody laser. Sharp, focused, to the point, the actors are all animate, and it really makes their presence on screen feel prominent. The choice of camera angles only emphasises the stylisation, and what I really appreciated most on the directional front is just how minimal the CG is in favour of practical effects and more traditional filmmaking techniques. Modern horror movies tend to be very flashy and will either rely on CG to make their films work, or they'll use gore to stun the audience into thinking they're impressive. This film takes its time with carefully structured scenes and prosthetics that, while not particularly believable, are fun, they feel appropriate, they don't knock me nauseous with half-baked computer-generated effects. They do use CG, but more often than not, it's sparingly. Kinda like the gaffer tape holding together the cracks in a production. It's not there to make you pay attention to it, it's there to help smooth over any inconsistencies that might detract from this film's story. And on the subject of story, I also absolutely have to commend the script for this film. It's good, solid writing for the most part. I like the playing around with the narrative structure, and while the dialogue for the most part is a little bit silly, for the most part it's just on the right side of cheesy and perfectly well written. This is a fun little script in all honesty, and it's one that doesn't overstay its welcome, clocking in at only an hour and 18 minutes long. The only fault I can pick with the script is that I'd argue that the ladies on a night out narrative is probably the weakest of the lot for me. And that's largely down to the ending, which I won't spoil, but it does rather seem to come a bit out of nowhere. And the soundtrack choices and some of the dialogue in this do seem to date it a bit for me. Though I suppose I should probably blame the soundtrack more than the script for those kind of issues. I don't know. I kind of feel like the other three stories are a bit more solid and consistent, whereas this one, well, I'm on board with it, but it just doesn't hit me in the same way that the others did. I should also point out that other than that one soundtrack choice in the party sequence, the rest of the OST is actually really quite solid. They managed to keep things somewhat light and frantic. It feels like a proper Halloween movie score. It's not something I'd be in a rush to pop on and listen to on its own, but it does its job well enough in just being a pretty powerfully composed piece. It effectively puts the audience in a Halloween feeling, so I really have to commend them for that. The Cine is also really quite impressive here. They use a very good mixed range of shots, and while some of the footage has been digitally altered in post, the excellent use of Dutch angles, crash zooms, and traditional shot structure really helps this film bring its own life and spirit to the party. When combined with the script, soundtrack, and directional choices, it creates something that I haven't seen in decades. A horror film that looks like the classics I remember watching growing up, but with a new lick of paint, a new angle, something genuinely original and entertaining. I mean, they get the tone of the film set up right from the first few seconds, when a mock 50s educational film about staying safe at Halloween runs before hard cutting into a full colour image of a lit up jack-o'-lantern. This quite literally is the filmmaker drawing a direct parallel between the films you probably grew up watching and the films you're about to see. And I find Dougherty's trying to reach that nostalgic part of your brain is a really quite endearing thing. I can't of course talk about this film without mentioning the astounding cast. With Dylan Baker stealing the show for my money as Stephen Wilkes, the local high school principal with the deadly hobby, Brian Cox is also phenomenal as the old miser Mr. Krieg, and the very innocent Anna Paquin as Laurie gives arguably the best performance out of any of the cast in her story. The supporting cast are pretty good to begin with, so these guys have done well to almost blow them out of the water. I think everyone involved knew exactly the tone that this film was going for pretty perfectly, and they all give more than reasonable performances throughout. Finally, and this is more of a closing note, one of the things that did endear me to this film is the non-specific timing for when exactly it takes place. It can be assumed based on the modern technology seen in this film that it couldn't have taken place any later than the mid-2000s. But with its strange retro-chic emphasis on mishmashing the most memorable aspects of older decades, you never really truly get a feel for exactly when this film is supposed to be happening. There are VHSs bounding around in this film. Hell, at one point you see a guy watching TV in his house on an old 1960s cabinet setup. I like how they keep it all a bit vague because it means that, barring one or two incidents, I can't accuse this film of really having aged. It looks pretty much as good as it did the day it came out, which is over 10 years ago at this point. Everything from the costume choices, Sam's costume is a design classic, through to subtle things like the style of carvings used in the jack-o'-lanterns, all look nondescript, and it means it keeps it open to the widest possible audience. Normally, with a film like this, I'd be inclined to say that it was a bit... but I really can't do that here. The script keeps pace, and with gorgeous visuals pretty much solidly throughout, it really feels like a true labour of love. I don't use the words modern classic often or lightly when talking about this film, but Trick or Treat for my money has the potential to, at minimum, be a cult classic in the making within the next 10 years. That's if it isn't already gaining momentum. And if there's any justice in the world, I think it should be held up against other classic horrors like Creepshow or Tales from the Crypt, as a great example of non-popularist filmmaking for our time. The fact that this film is only really represented in the UK by a rather inferior DVD copy and an unreasonably expensive dumped-on-a-disc Blu-ray copy deeply upsets me. This film is a definite contender for the full Arrow video treatment. If you're looking for something new to sink your teeth into this Halloween, give Trick or Treat a try. It's probably one of the better Halloween films you've never seen. Happy Halloween, everybody.